Mr. Chairman, we should probably get that looked at. Maybe General Nakasone can. But speaking of technology and General Nakasone, General, I have an offer I think you can't refuse. You have, of course, tremendous assets and personnel in Georgia, NSA Georgia, the Cyber Center for Excellence at Fort Gordon, just around the corner from Augusta University's Cyber Center as well, an academic resource there. And I would like to invite you to join me, and perhaps we can get some barbecue and pecan pie as well, to visit with your personnel at NSA Georgia and or at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, which, based in Atlanta with facilities across the country, is conducting much of the advanced research consistent with the chairman's commitment to technology as a key frontier in our national security. So will you join me in Georgia, General?
I will, Senator.
Looking forward to that and appreciate the commitment. Speaking of Georgia, Director Haynes, the assessment warns, quote, Russia is particularly focused on improving its ability to target critical infrastructure, including underwater cables, and that, quote, the PLA Navy and Air Force already are the largest in the region, meaning the Indo-Pacific region, and continue to field advanced platforms that improve China's ability to try to establish air superiority and project power beyond the first island chain. The assessment doesn't make explicit mention of the submarine domain, but during the Navy's posture hearing last year before VSASC, the CNO testified that submarines are the highest demand capability in both Indo-PACOM and EUCOM. We have the Kings Bay submarine base in Georgia. I want to ask you first, do you share our military's assessment that the undersea domain is critical and one in which we presently enjoy unique advantages?
Yes, absolutely.
And so what I want to ask you to work with my office on is if and as the Navy considers activities at Kings Bay and some of the emerging capabilities and technologies in the undersea domain and their potential presence or augmentation at Kings Bay, that you'll work with me to determine how the intelligence community can provide intelligence support to those efforts. Will you work with my office on that, Director?
Yes, absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Remaining focused on Georgia, we have the third busiest deep water port in the country, and Director Wray, as a Georgian, you know this. Ports are critical infrastructure, yes?
Absolutely.
And there are threats to our ports and threats that move through our ports. We've seen foreign intelligence services try to infiltrate, according to public reporting in the Wall Street Journal, for example, intelligence gathering equipment through U.S. ports. There's a risk of drug trafficking through U.S. ports, human trafficking through U.S. ports. Director Wray, I'd like to ask you to redouble a commitment you've made to me in the past to ensure that the FBI is fully focused on protecting the Port of Savannah and other seaports across the country.
We're very focused on port security. I haven't forgotten our previous conversations on the subject, both in Savannah, but also in places like Norfolk and other significant ports around the United States. And certainly a lot of the comments that occurred earlier about other technologies and the Chinese government's ability to advance their agenda at our expense apply in spades to ports and port technology and port services.
So speaking of ports and critical infrastructure, I'd like to hear from you on this, Director Wray, and then also from Director Haynes. Director Wray, what are the capabilities that you lack that require the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis to undertake its own with respect to the protection of, for example, ports or other critical infrastructure? And Director Haynes, so you can contemplate it for a moment before I come to you, the question I'm going to ask you is why we require an independent intelligence office at the Department of Homeland Security and why the FBI can't do that work. Go ahead, Director.
Well, I think we work well and closely with that office at DHS. I don't know that I could point to a specific thing that we lack, but certainly more players on the field is a useful exercise.
Well, sometimes, unless there's duplication or overlap or inefficiency, right?
There is that. I will say that what we focus on the most, and it relates to the overall theme of technology here from a different way, is that we in the FBI and to some extent throughout the intelligence community have a big data problem, to use the cliche, of our own, right? Which is that in every investigation, every intelligence analysis, the amount of data that is available or that is being reviewed has exploded over the last few years. If you just look at a typical FBI case, we've, in one active shooter situation, for example, to pick something simple, we've had ones where we've had more data pour in than the entire Library of Congress in just one investigation. So the ability to have tools and people who can get through that data as quickly as possible to figure out the important leads, to marshal that data, whether that's AI, whether that's data analysts, all those sorts of things become incredibly important to this community's ability to marshal the data and to inform the people who need to be informed.
With the chairman's permission, could Director Haynes answer my question as well, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. There are a number of missions that DHS and FBI have in relation to domestic intelligence work that's being done across the nation, where they're really taking the lead. And, when you look at, for example, cybersecurity issues related to critical infrastructure in the United States, CISA within DHS obviously has an incredibly important role to play, as does the FBI in working with the private sector and with others on these contexts. And the advantage, I think, of having intel elements, for example, in both the FBI and at DHS is that they're able to work most closely under essentially with their agency and under those authorities to help to support effectively the mission that those agencies are taking. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Director. We'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're through the first round. I've checked with Senator Collins, Senator King. They're prepared to move to the classified section. Senator Rubio and I are. I think Senator Cotton and Senator Cornyn have one question each, and there's about 80 votes in on the second vote. I've not voted on the second vote, so we'll try to get through these next questions. We will then ask our witnesses to be able to exit the room first before the audience exits, and we will reconvene in our skiff here. Senator Cotton.
Thank you. I want to return to the issue I addressed at first, which is politicization of analysis and resources. And that can happen by altering conclusions to fit a party line, but can also happen, as I stressed, in priorities and focus and resources. So, Director Haynes, I want to return again to page 33 of the threat assessment, where you write, transnational, racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists continue to pose the most lethal threat to U.S. persons and interests. I just found that astonishing. I compared it to fentanyl, and you said you mean that in the context of terrorism, correct? So you'll agree with me that fentanyl is a more lethal threat to Americans than racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists?
Yes, absolutely.
But in the context of terrorism, your conclusion is that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists are a more lethal threat to Americans than ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah?
Thank you. Yes, what we say in the piece, and it's under the category, essentially, so of global terrorism, right? So it goes through the different areas of global terrorism, including transnationally, racially, and ethnically motivated violent extremism. The fact that it is the most lethal threat for with respect to U.S. persons is something that we actually stated, I think, over 2 years ago in another report as well that similarly laid out these different issues. And it simply is a question of how many U.S. persons are killed or wounded as a consequence of attacks.
Director Burns, do you agree that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists are a more lethal threat to Americans than ISIS or Al-Qaeda?
Well, I agree with Senator, with what Director Haynes just said, that if you measure this in terms of American lives lost or people who were wounded, I think those statistics bear that out. I mean, we obviously take extremely seriously the threat posed by groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Hezbollah as well. That's our job as a foreign intelligence service as well.
I find this astonishing.
Senator Cornyn.
Just as COVID exposed our vulnerability of our supply chains, I think the war in Ukraine has demonstrated the weakness of our industrial base when it comes to replenishing the weapons that we are supplying to the Ukrainians, which I'm all in favor of, and they're using them to good effect. But General Barrier, in World War II, we became the arsenal of democracy and saved Britain. and Europe. But if we got involved in a shooting war in Asia, we would not be ready. And I just want to ask you, in terms of an intelligence assessment, how much should we be concerned about our inability to replenish the weapons that we're supplying to Ukraine and the degradation of our defense industrial base?
Senator, I do appreciate that question, but that's really a question, I think, for our policymakers and decision makers inside the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. Certainly, our readiness is crucial if we're tested by the People's Republic of China, and I'll leave it there.
Well, we're coming to the close of this open hearing. I want to make two final comments. One, I know Senator Cotton raised this on his first round of questions, and I raised it in my opening comment. Part of our job is the intelligence oversight of all of your agencies and the other roughly 13 additional agencies. We want, following on Senator Round's questions, to help make the case, many of us at least do, about 702. And we're going to push you to declassify more information so that we can, again, convince the American public and, for that matter, convince the 85 or 86 or 84 colleagues, 83 colleagues, we're up to 17 now, who are not on this committee. It's one of the reasons why it is so, just does not pass the smell test, the administration and the director's current view about giving this committee access to the classified documents that we have every right to see in terms of our oversight role involved in terms of the documents that were found at former President Trump, President Biden, and President Pence's. This trust relationship has to go two ways. And the absurdity of the position that somehow a special prosecution about mishandling of documents is more important than making sure that critical top secret documents, that if that we get a chance to review those and that mitigation efforts have been taken, that is not the kind of collaboration, cooperation that we expect. And it will tie and restrain our ability to kind of make the kind of trusting relationship with the non-members of this committee on issues like 702. So I want to be loud and clear on that, and I can assure you there's not a member on this committee, doesn't matter on which side of the dais they sit, that doesn't believe that. Last point I want to make, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Rubio, is that we get to see you guys, and we get to see many of you who are sitting behind you at these sessions and these hearings. We all want to make sure, though, that the literally thousands of men and women, the vast majority of which who have to work in secret, in many cases can't even tell their loved ones what they're doing, that we have your back. We appreciate what you do. We are a safer nation and a stronger nation because of the work of the men and women of the IC. And we look forward to continuing to support you in any way we can. But we really do want to make sure that message is relayed to those not only back at headquarters, but in many cases, the men and women who are deployed all around the world. Senator Rubio?
To just echo the point the chairman just made, okay, on this issue of the documents. Let me just take a hypothetical. Let me start with this. Every agency of our government, right, they come here before Congress, have oversight committees, they have public hearings. Questions are asked. They have to answer them in public. People have to testify. The unique aspect of what your agencies do is, by necessity, it has to be in secret. Most of what you do has to be kept secret. That's the work of intelligence. So how do you conduct oversight over something like that? For a long time, there really wasn't any congressional oversight until the mid-1970s, when committees uncovered all kinds of situations involving the intelligence communities, actually almost destroyed the CIA. And the result is the creation of this committee and our counterpart in the House. And so basically, it comes down to a handful of members in the House and Senate who are entrusted with conducting oversight to ensure that not only is the intelligence agencies focused on the right things, but are doing it in a way that protects both civil liberties and our national security. Difficult balance. So now we come to, that's our role, and it's one we have to play very carefully, and one that's really important for the country, because we need what you do. But we also understand that left unsupervised, any agency at any time, especially ones with these extraordinary powers, can do things that are really troubling and end up actually threatening these agencies' ability to continue to work. Now, getting to these classified documents, I want to just this hypothetical. If tomorrow I take a folder full of classified information, or anybody does, outside the building inappropriately, okay, for whatever reason, there's going to be an investigation. And there are going to be two things that are going to happen, and they're two individual tracks. Track number one is, I violated the law. I potentially committed a crime, has been committed because information that's classified was removed from its proper setting. And the result is that there's going to be an investigation, and it could involve the criminal justice system. In most cases, obviously, when it comes to former presidents, may require special counsel, but generally it's the U.S. attorney that's going to look at that and figure that part of it out. Okay, that's not our oversight, and that's not our job to interfere in that. Separate from that is the job the intelligence agencies have of assessing, okay, this is the information that was stored inappropriately. Here's the risks to the country if that information was seen by someone who shouldn't have seen it, and here's what we are doing to mitigate against that risk. How can we possibly conduct oversight over A, whether you've assigned the proper risk assessment, and B, over whether the mitigation is appropriate? How can we possibly do that if we don't know what we're talking about? And that's really the situation that we're at right now. And that is that even though undoubtedly the information that was found in all three sites and so forth are things that we would have had access to, unless we can identify them, we can't begin to A, opine over whether or not the risk assessment is accurate, and B, whether the mitigation that's been assigned is appropriate. We can't do our job. And a special counsel cannot have veto authority over Congress's ability to do its job. It just can't happen. It won't happen. And so it will change the nature of the relationship between this committee, which I think has been very cooperative. And I know we don't have a lot of competition in terms of cooperation, but very cooperative. And I'm very proud of the work this committee's done. And I don't want it to get to that, and it shouldn't get to that. But this is going to be addressed one way or the other.
Amen. And with the recognition that I run a risk that other members will come back with one last question. James, you're going to get the last bite, but then once you're done with that question, appreciate, and I think I can speak for all of the members, we would all echo what all the members on both sides of the dais would agree with what Senator Rubio and I have just said. Senator Langford, last
Chairman,
question.
I appreciate that. I know we're headed to closed session on just a couple of statements I want to be able to make in an open session format. One is I wanted to reiterate the whole issue of TikTok that's come up several times and just be able to make the comment I think we'll all agree with. This is not about TikTok. This is about any app, any electronics that are coming from China. That information goes back through China. So I don't want us to just zero in and just say this is just a TikTok thing, and if we can deal with TikTok, then it's solved. That's not true. There are other apps, there are other things that are coming out of China that are electronic that are doing the exact same thing, just in different areas. Just TikTok is kind of the big dog in this. It reminds me somewhat of our conversation several years ago on Kaspersky, when Kaspersky used to be the free virus software that you could get at Best Buy. What a great deal that you can get this free virus software that runs through Russia to be able to check your computer for viruses. We've all learned the lesson of that. I don't think we've learned the lesson on China, so I want to be able to reinforce that this is much bigger than just a TikTok issue, though they're the big dog. The second one is just the issue about what's happening on our southern border. There's some comments that are made in the public statement about this being a Western Hemisphere. Senator Cornyn and I were just at the border not long ago when we were in Yuma, Arizona. We looked through the listing there. At that particular week, as we were dealing with, there were more people from Uzbekistan that were coming across the border there than there were actually from El Salvador. When we were there, we actually walked up as the Border Patrol was arresting 2 Chinese nationals coming across, and we're fully aware we're dealing with more than 100 Russian nationals that are crossing our border every single month illegally. So my issue is here, this is a national security issue, as we've identified individuals crossing our southern border that the FBI has interdicted that are coming to assassinate former President Bush not long ago. That came back out. So this is a bigger national security issue, and what I want to reiterate is this is not just an issue of push-pull factors in the Western Hemisphere. The openness of our border is also facilitating individuals that I would assume the FBI is not able to be able to keep tabs on, the Chinese nationals and Russian nationals and others that are coming into our country that are, quote-unquote, seeking asylum, but we don't know where they are in the country. Is that true or false on that?
Yes, I certainly did not mean to suggest that the border is solely, related to the comment made about the Western Hemisphere in my opening remarks. I absolutely agree that there's national security issues with vetting folks who go across the border. We obviously participate in vetting in the intelligence community, and NCTC takes that role from my office and participates in trying to ensure that we can manage that.
Director Ray, are you able to keep tabs on these individuals when they're coming in? Has that been assigned to you?
We're not able to keep tabs on every single person who comes in, certainly. We have all sorts of investigations into certain people who get in, and we try to work very hard on both sides of the border to support DHS's efforts and to some extent our neighbors south of the border from preventing them from coming in.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you all again. Please take back our thanks to all the members. And I would again ask our audience, please, to allow our witnesses to leave first, and we will reconvene immediately after those of us who have not voted on the last vote. Thank you.